down a little bit of it. Move! When people ask me, how many countries have you been to? I can't give a simple, direct answer. Does Taiwan count? Or Hong Kong and Macau? Or do they all count as China? The answer depends on who you ask. I've been to Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland China. Did I visit 4 countries or just one? If I say just one, my Taiwanese friends might slap me in the face. And what about countries that I spent a very brief time in? I was technically there, physically. Join the Navy. See the world. From the ship. One time, my ship was docked in Kuwait, but nobody was allowed to go out. However, I technically stepped onto Kuwait for about 5 seconds in order to take out the trash. But I do not claim to have been to Kuwait. I spent a significantly longer amount of time in Jordan, when it was almost time for me to get out of the military at the end of my contract. Our ship was docked in Jordan for 1 day. Nobody was allowed to leave the ship except for me and a few others who were also getting out of the military. I walked on the pier of a Jordanian military base and got into a car and was driven to a building in the city. At the building, they gave me an entry stamp in my passport so that I would be allowed to leave from the airport. Then, they drove us to the airport. Unlike Kuwait, I got stamps in my passport, entry and exit stamps on the same date. Legitimate evidence of my technical presence in Jordan. But for all intents and purposes, if someone asks me, I do not count Jordan as a country I have been to. It's very easy for me to not count Jordan and Kuwait. However, my time in Canada is a whole nother can of worms, and much more difficult to decide whether or not it counts. I was there, just barely across the border, for about 2 hours. I intended to stay longer, but I didn't, because I wasn't allowed to. Thus, this video is about to get political. Brace yourself. I had seen Niagara Falls from the American side already, and I also wanted to see them from the Canadian side. I didn't know how long I wanted to be in Canada, but Canada wanted me to know how long I wanted to be in Canada. I liked flowing freely, not being stuck to a plan. I figured that I should wander around for a couple of weeks and maybe check out Toronto too. According to the U.S. Travel Government website, I did not need a visa if visiting under 90 days. I was a little nervous about crossing the border. At the end of the bridge, I entered the Canadian check-in place. Dun, dun, dun. I approached the counter and showed my passport. The immigration officer asked how long would I be in Canada. That's when my troubles began. Looking back at my response, I now see how ignorant I was. I had never crossed the border on foot before. In fact, I had never traveled by myself before. There was no immigration checkpoints in the Navy. Permission was already obtained beforehand. The ship just pulled into the pier and we were there. I was young and dumb and simply couldn't imagine that not having an itinerary would be a big freaking deal. And of all the places, I sure the hell didn't expect Canada to be so strict. Americans didn't even used to need a passport to go there. When he asked me how long I would be in Canada, I told him that I might wander around for a week or 2. Then he called somebody over and told me to follow the lady to the building next door. The woman had short blonde hair. Let's just call her Karen for now. I said hello, then she said hello. As we walked across the street, she asked if I went to school. I said no, and then she asked, "Do you have a job?" I'm sure that not having a job like normal people didn't make me look too good.
We went into the building, and the blonde lady left, and I had to talk to another woman behind the counter. This one was a lot nicer. She asked me some questions. I explained that I had saved up some money and now I'm traveling. She was a polite woman and told me that they were concerned about if I was planning on ever leaving Canada, and also that I have enough money to support myself while wandering around. She seemed to believe me that I'm simply an explorer and not some criminal or someone trying to escape to Canada, and said that if I could show her my bank statement that shows I have enough money to support my travels, that I could stay however long I needed.
Of course, I didn't have a bank statement on me. She pointed to a hotel across the border and said that it had a computer room and that I could print it there. She said to go print it off and bring it back, and then I can travel to Canada. As if going back and forth across the border is just no big deal at all, such an easy thing to do. I walked all the way back across the bridge border and found the hotel and the computer room, then had to pay a fee in order to print it. And then I walked back across the border again with my bank statement in my hand. I was getting sweaty since the sun was rising higher and all of the walking with my big heavy backpack on. I entered the building once again, and a man told me to take a seat. And no, his name was not Chris Hansen. Soon after, the Karen lady with the short blonde hair called me up to the counter. That's a different lady than the one I talked to last time. I handed her my passport and bank statement and explained that the other lady told me to come back with it. Unfortunately, that other lady was not there. The woman with the short blonde hair was a bitch. She had a very serious face and began questioning me. I had to explain again that I was a wanderer. She said, "Why would I let you into my country? You haven't shown me any proof you intend to go back to your life in Texas." I once again explained that I didn't intend to go back for a while. I told her that I might go to Europe or somewhere after Canada because I'm a wanderer and I'm traveling. She didn't seem to get it. She said that me wanting to wander was a problem. I directly asked her if wandering a country was illegal. "No," she said. "Then what's wrong with that?" I asked. "I told you what's wrong with that. Aren't you listening? I can't trust you to leave Canada." If Justin Bieber is allowed to stay in Canada, I should be allowed to, too. Whenever I first crossed the bridge, the guy in the booth let people pass when they told him that they would be there just for a day or two, mainly to see the falls. I didn't even see him stamp anyone's passport. He simply looked at it and asked a couple of questions and let them pass, because they, unlike me, were normal people. But of course, because I was honest and wanted to be in Canada for more than just a couple days, I ended up being a security concern. As usual. I understand the concern and suggested her to give me a date to be out by, and I'll make sure to leave by then. You can't technically know for sure that the people who walk across to see the waterfalls plan to leave either, because a lot of people walk back to the US and don't have a return flight or anything. She then said, "Oh, I intend to give you a date." She began asking me more questions like, "Did you reserve a hotel room?" and looked at me like I'm a complete moron when I told her no. "Then where do you intend to stay?" I told her that I could just walk in and get a room. I've done it many times, and there are tons of hotels in that area. Of course, I didn't tell her that I was carrying a tent in my backpack, and I planned on camping a little. She probably would have thought that was terrible. She then asked me if I had researched about Canada and knew what I was going to do there. "I haven't looked up everything. Maybe go to Toronto?" I said. After mentioning Toronto, she said, "Do you even know anything about Toronto?" "I know it's big," I said. That answer seemed to make her even more frustrated with me. She started angrily ranting things like,
When you go on vacation, you need to plan what you are going to be doing.
Walking to Canada now. That's Canada right there. I am on the border of US and Canada. Wow, look at that. A different view of the falls.
Why? Several times she used that word, vacation. She didn't seem to get the point that I'm a drifter and I'm not on vacation. Then she told me to go sit down after a while, and I waited once again. After some time, she called me back to the counter. She had a document stapled to my passport. I'm allowing you to enter Canada for today, which I probably shouldn't even be doing. If you're not out of Canada by midnight tonight, there will be a warrant out for your arrest. It was about 12 p.m. As I was leaving, she said, "Have fun wandering for 12 hours. Bitch. It wouldn't have been worth it to get a room. I would have the room for less than a day and wouldn't have been able to sleep there, even. I didn't have anywhere to leave my bag and had to carry it around while in Canada that day. That was the suckiest part. The so-called Canadian city was just a bunch of gimmicks and tourist stuff.
It looked like a freaking carnival. However, the place had some beautiful parks, and I got to see a good view of the falls. While in Canada, I felt somewhat like an unwelcomed guest, even though I knew I shouldn't because it was just that one lady that I had a problem with. I thought that Canada would be a welcoming neighbor, but whatever, assholes are everywhere, in every country. I was probably there in that tourist town for 1.5 to 2 hours. Then I walked back across the border. It was my first time to ever go to another country completely alone and where I didn't know anybody. It was also my first time to walk across a border. Many people who have had more traveling experience than me at that time would have known this. Do not ever say to immigration officers that you don't have a plan or a scheduled departure date. Anyway, the story I just told happened 10 years ago. But, after my experience with Canadian bureaucracy, I'm not surprised that Canada became China during the plandemic.